Hello students. Today we're going to discuss MLA Works Cited pages. The objectives of this presentation are to determine why you might need a works cited page, to figure out where it might go in your essay, figure out how you'll format your works cited page, think about the basic things that you need to know to create a works cited page, find the works cited page samples in the Little Seagull Handbook, and use the examples in the Little Seagull Handbook for your own sources. So to begin, why on earth do I need a works cited page? The first reason you want to have a works cited page, or a references page, or a bibliography, these are all synonymous terms. The first reason is you want to show where you found the sources that you've quoted in your essay. This is important for a variety of reasons. One reason is to ensure that you haven't committed academic dishonesty. What that means is you don't want to plagiarize somebody else's work. So having a works cited page at the end of your essay is one of the safeguards to keep you from plagiarizing. Another reason that you need a works cited page is because you want your reader to be able to find the source if they want to look up that source for their own research. In reality, a works cited page is primarily for your reader, and it's really for scholarship purposes. So let me give you an example. Let's say I'm reading an article about something, and I find a quote or a source or a statistic or something like that that really interests me in the essay. I can then go to the works cited page, look up that particular source, and then go seek it out myself so that I may be able to use it in my own research. In that way, a works cited page is really for your reader. Okay, next objective. Where do I put a works cited page? So your works cited page should always go at the very end of your essay. You should insert a page break when the text of your essay, like your conclusion, is over, and then it will go following on the next page. It should have the same pagination as your essay. And what I mean by that is pagination is the number of pages, the order of pages. So if your essay ends on page 5, you'd insert a page break, and then your works cited page would begin on page 6. You don't ever want to keep your works cited page in a separate document or file from your essay when you go to submit it, because what happens is if your works cited page is separate from your essay, then it looks like your essay has no works cited page. So you want to make sure that they're always housed together in the same document. Now, how do you format a works cited page? So, a works cited page, the words works cited should be centered at the top of the page. You should not put them in quotation marks, you should not underline them, highlight them, make them a larger size or anything like that. It's just those words, works cited. Then the header of your paper should have the same page number, the same pagination as the whole essay. All your entries should be listed alphabetically by the first word of the entry. This is really important. Again, that's there for the reader, so the reader can easily find the source on your works cited page that they might be looking for. Coincidentally, well, actually, it's not that much of a coincidence, it's by design. Those words that begin each citation on your works cited page are usually the words that you'll be using to reference that author or that work in the body of your essay. So let's say, for example, you were citing Gwendolyn Brooks a whole bunch in your essay, and you were referring to her as Brooks in the body of your essay. Then when your reader got to the end, if they wanted to look her up, they would look for Brooks on the works cited page. Same thing if you were referencing the movie Napoleon Dynamite in your essay. Because Napoleon Dynamite is a film, the reader would then be looking for that title as the first thing that would come on that reference page. So it's important that they're listed alphabetically according to the first word of the entry so that your reader can easily find them. In a formal essay, each entry on your Works Cited page should have a hanging indent, and I'll show you what that looks like. A hanging indent allows the first word of the entry to sort of hang out there so that your reader can easily see it, again, to help them be able to scan through many entries. And the whole page, the whole Works Cited page, should be double spaced. And then each entry should have the proper MLA information for that type of source, which we'll go over that in a little bit. So here's an example of what your Works Cited page might look like. This is a short one. It only has 3 entries. But you'll notice some of these things that I just went over. First, the words Works Cited are at the top. You notice that they're not bolded, they're not underlined, they're not in quotation marks, they're not a bigger or smaller font than anything else. They are the same as the rest of the paper. You'll notice then that the header, like the rest of the essay, has the author's last name and then the page number. We assume that this is page 6 of the entire essay because the Works Cited is part of the essay, but it begins on a new page. Then you notice that all the entries are alphabetically listed according to the first word of the entry. So B comes before M and N comes after M. You also notice that they're alphabetized. There's no bullets and nothing is underlined. That's important. You want to alphabetize by the first word of the entry, no other system. And then you may notice that each has a hanging indent. Now, a hanging indent sort of looks like this. You see how all the entries are sort of hanging, the first word of each entry is sort of hanging out there. And this entry is sort of shaped, I like to think, sort of like a panhandle or like the shape of Oklahoma, where the handle is hanging out and all the other stuff is off to the side. This allows you to easily see that first word like it's a flag hanging out there. And then you notice that the whole page here is double spaced. And then each entry does have proper MLA information, and we'll go over that in a few minutes. Now, how do we get our Works Cited page to have the hanging indent? So this is an example of what the Works Cited page looks like before it has a hanging indent. So it's important for you to let Microsoft Word or whatever word processing program you're using do the heavy lifting of the creating the hanging indent for you. You might be tempted to play with the tabs and play with the spacing bars and the rulers up above. I encourage you to not do that. Instead, Microsoft Word can easily do it for you. So your first job would then be to just make each entry without the hanging indent. So you type everything in there, you get it ready, and when you're ready to go, it's really easy to create the hanging indent. So you just highlight your entries very easily. And then if you're using an older version of Microsoft Word, you would go to the Format area in the ribbon up above and then to Paragraph. If you're using a newer version and all the shortcuts are pretty much on screen, you'd still go to Paragraph and then you'd click on that little arrow at the bottom to expand the paragraph options. And in any case, whichever program or version of Microsoft Word that you're using, the paragraph dialog box will pop open, and it looks the same in both versions. What you'll do is you want to go to the indentation area, and then you want to find the drop-down box that says Special. and then you just choose or select the hanging option, and then you hit OK. And when you come back, those entries are now have the hanging indent. You notice how there's that sort of handle area off to the left, so that that first word is highlighted, so it's easy to scan down the entries. Okay, now our next objective. What are the basic rules that I have to know to create a Works Cited page? The first rule in creating a Works Cited page, and I mean this, is don't try to memorize all of the rules. If you look at your handbook, there are so many rules and so many things in here that would be kind of impossible to memorize them. In fact, I don't even have them all memorized. You want to use your handbook as your guide. I like to use this analogy a lot. When you're cooking, if you're going to make something special, most of us turn to a recipe book and we try to follow the directions of the recipe book. We don't just go from memory thinking, oh, I made that complicated thing 3 years ago, and then just try to throw it together. No, we go back and look at the recipe book. For those of you who have ever baked cookies, and you baked cookies or a cake and you put things in the wrong order, you might have come out with something all wrong. So like that, you want to use your handbook. Okay, you want to look at your handbook and follow it until you've got the basics down for a couple of things. You might notice yourself that when you're cooking something, if you always cook the same thing over and over again, after a while you don't have to look at the recipe book. But for those things that you don't use every single day, you probably will use it, and your handbook is just like that. You might also use a credible source like the Online Writing Lab or OWL of Purdue, or any of the other credible sources online that show you how to set this up. I will caution you though, please stay away from using your word processing programs like Microsoft Word's option to create a Works Cited page for you, or using any of the shortcuts on the internet like I don't know, Biblio Wizard or any of those kinds of things. While you might use those as a shortcut, you always have to double check it against your handbook, okay? And it's better to just, in fact, use your handbook, because you're trying to learn how to do this, and following the examples is a really important part of the learning process. Moreover, those sites are almost always incorrect. When students consistently use them, I find that they are consistently not understanding the process of citation, and they get them wrong because the websites are often wrong. So please just use your handbook. Okay, next rule. There are some basics to note. Even though that I'm saying like don't memorize all the rules, there's a few things that you should know, and these are just the basics, okay? So every time you have a source that you're using in your paper, there's gonna be pieces of information for that source, like an author's name, the title, and publication information. So for each source, there's pieces of information, and you need to gather those pieces of information to create your Works Cited page. So the next thing that you have to know, aside from that there's pieces of information that you have to gather, there's an order that you have to put those pieces of information in. The way that you put those pieces of information together helps your reader determine what type of source it is that you're quoting, or citing, I should say. So it's your job to figure out what kind of source you have and be accurate about that. Gather or find all that required information for that particular citation and put that information in the right order. This is where your handbook comes in handy. It's really helpful, and it's a guide for you. And it's important because when you put your Works Cited page together, all the way that you structure your citations is gonna help guide your reader, because citing a book is a little bit different than citing a film. A lot of these things you'll see have many things in common when you're citing it, but they do have little bits and pieces that are different. So it's your job to make sure that you gather all the required information, correctly identify your source, and put the information in the correct order. Another thing that I want to highlight here is that it's really important when you're doing this to pay attention to small things like the formatting. For example, if something in the example in your handbook is underlined or italicized, that's really important. Or if something has been put in quotation marks, that's really important. And here are some helpful hints about that. Now, when you're thinking about titles are often the things that you'll see italicized or underlined or put in quotation marks. So there's two types of categories when it comes to titles. The first is large works. Okay, large works, we italicize them or underline them, never both, because that indicates that they are in fact major works. And major works will be things like books, the titles of a whole book, the title of a magazine, and a magazine is a large work because the magazine title is the thing that holds together all those smaller articles inside of it. Or a newspaper, just like a magazine, a newspaper title holds many articles and other things inside of it. Another large work might be a website. If you think about a website, there's many pages in a website, and the whole website is like a large book or a magazine. Likewise, a film is large, or the title of a TV show. So think of a TV show as being, let's give an example of Sesame Street. Sesame Street is a TV show, but it's been on for 40 or 45 years at this point, and there's hundreds and hundreds of episodes, and each episode would have its own episode title. So the large work is going to be italicized most of the time, or underlined, one, not both. And it's really important to make sure that you understand that the large works are italicized and that they may stand alone. Then with MLA, it's important to understand the difference with short works. Shorter works are things like the title of an article. The article is the short work, and so quotation marks would go around it. Okay, and whereas the name of the newspaper would be italicized. So let's say we had a newspaper article called Stop the Violence Now. Okay, Stop the Violence Now, that's the name of the article. Quotation marks would be around that to indicate to your reader that it's a title of an article. Now if we then follow that up by saying it was in the Chicago Sun-Times, then Chicago Sun-Times would be italicized to suggest that that's the title of the newspaper it was in. Likewise, song titles are usually put in quotation marks because they belong to an album, and the album is the large work, so that would be italicized. The title of a TV episode would be put in quotation marks. Poems, because they're short, they would be put in quotation marks. The titles of short stories, likewise, in quotation marks. Short works are generally distributed and published aren't published by themselves usually. They're usually housed in something larger, and so that's why they're put in quotation marks. And it's important to know that these designation, these small conventions, these formatting things like italicizing and putting things in quotation marks are there to indicate to your reader that these things have been published. That's why it's important for you never to put quotation marks or underline the titles of your own writing, because they've not yet been published. Another thing you also have to pay attention to when you're following the examples in your handbook is to all of the small things like where a period is, where a colon is versus a semicolon. Those things are all really important, and you need to follow those examples exactly in your own citations and works cited pages. Okay, so how do you find the samples that you're going to cite in the Little Seagull Handbook? So the pages you want to look for are 109 to 148. The directories, now the directories are really important. So when you're looking for in-text citations, those begin on 109, and the directories for works cited pages begin on 110 and end on 112. So now how do you actually use your handbook? This is really where it starts to get good. Okay, so you go to your Little Seagull Handbook and you go to the MLA section. The beginning section is about in-text documentation, and that's another presentation. So you want to look at that if that's what you're looking for here. But what we're looking here are the lists of works cited, because that's what we're focusing on in this presentation. So there's the first thing you want to ask yourself when you're going to make your works cited page is, what kind of source do I have and how did I access that? That's really important. So what kind of source do I have means, do I have a book? Do I have a magazine? Do I have a newspaper? Do I have an encyclopedia, a dictionary? Do I have an interview? Do I have, what do I have? What is it that I have? Does it have an author, or does it have a corporate author, or is there no author? Does it have an editor? Is it a translation? You have to ask yourself all these things. And this directory here on pages 110 to 112 are really helpful in answering those questions, because you can look at what your source is and then look at the directory and see, what do I have? Where does this match up? Okay, and when I ask you to figure out what kind of source you have and then ask how did you access it, you have to, when I'm talking about access, I mean, did you access it as a print book? What was the medium? Was it a print book, or was it a PDF of a book? Did you access the magazine article actually in the print magazine, or did you access it online? These are really important things to think about. And oftentimes if I've given you a source to look at, you'll often have it in as a PDF that I have downloaded from the internet. And in that case, you want to think about it as it was accessed from the internet, because it was just saved as a PDF, but it's archived that day that I downloaded it from the internet. Okay, so once you've asked yourself those two important questions, then you have to find that type of source in the directory. And I'm going to just highlight some important ones and look at these as if we're looking at your book. So the first 20 or so entries in this directory are for print books. Okay, so most books that you might be looking at have one author, but you cite it differently if there's 2 or 3 or 4 authors. And if you're citing more than one text from an author, there's another way to do that too, so you would want to look that up. You might want to be looking up an organization or the government as an author. A lot of times you'll be looking at books that were put out by a whole organization or something like that, or maybe like a census data. Then the government would be the author, or the organization would be the author. For example, if you were reading something from, say, Johns Hopkins or something like that. You might also be looking at works in an anthology. An anthology is a book that houses many other short pieces in it. So sometimes you can think of your textbook as an anthology. An anthology is somewhat like a magazine where it houses a lot of other short things in it. But it's cohesive. The difference between an anthology and a magazine is more ephemeral. It's more throwaway, usually made out of paper, whereas an anthology is a book that's printed that has many different types of smaller works inside of it. You might also be looking at an article in a reference book, like an encyclopedia, that kind of thing. So that's highlighting some important things about print books. Now let's look at print periodicals. So you might be looking at an article in a journal or a journal number by issue. A journal is more of a scholarly type of publication, so not like a popular magazine. So a journal might be put out by the American Medical Association or the Modern Language Association. Usually they're higher scholarly works, and sometimes they're numbered by issue or volume, and sometimes they're not. So I'm highlighting this here to show you that you have to pay attention, because some are one way and some are another. So you just have to look and see what you have. Then if you have a print magazine, that's a little bit different too. You might have an article in a daily newspaper or a weekly newspaper. Okay, for those print versions. Now here's the heavyweight for us most of the time these days are the online sources. So when you are citing a website, you might cite an entire website, depending if you got information from all of the different pages, or you might just be citing one page from a website. Those are a little bit different, and they have different ways to cite them. You might cite an online newspaper, which is a little bit different than a print newspaper. So you need to pay attention to those differences and make sure you're looking up the right example. You might also look at how to cite an article in an online magazine, and that is a little bit different than a print magazine. So it's important that you think about, well, how did I access it? Did I access it by actually buying the magazine and flipping through the pages and reading it, or did I access it from the internet? Because sometimes the versions are different, and how you'll cite them in the text of your essay is also different, because a print magazine has set page numbers, but an online magazine doesn't, because how I save it on my computer would have different pages from how you save it on your computer or view it on your computer, etc. Articles accessed through a database, so like if you're using ProQuest or EBSCOhost or any of those online databases that often your instructors ask you to use. Then if you use an online reference work, like an online encyclopedia, etc. Then there's also some other sources, like if you were going to cite an advertisement or a DVD or a film or a video clip, maybe an interview that you found that was published, a map or a chart or an image. If you wanted to cite something from television or radio, or something like an MP3, a PDF, or a digital file, something like that. So you can see here there's a wealth of different types of sources. So once you figure out what kind of source you have and how you accessed it, then you find the entry here in the directory. Then you'll notice that the directory examples have a page number after them. So you go to that example for that particular type of source. And then you use the information from your own source that you gathered and arrange it like the example. So when you turn to, say, book with one author, you'll notice that this handbook has a really wonderful tool for you, in that it highlights the different parts of the citation and explains what's needed for that kind of citation, and then it gives an example of it below. And I love this handbook because it parses out that for yous and it color codes it so you can see it visually. So in the text here, Little Seagull Handbook, the authors are always highlighted in sort of an orangish brownish. The titles of the work are in yellow, and then the publication information is in blue. Also, you'll notice in this handbook that there's some examples of documentation maps for different types of sources, like for a print book or for a website. So if you're having trouble figuring it out, look to those resources, the documentation maps, for that type of source, and a lot of times that can help you figure it out, like which number do I use on this publication information page, and what city do I use? You know, it's always the first city and who's the publisher, and etc., etc. So those can help you. Okay, so let's look at a book by one author. Here's the example from the text. So you begin, almost always, this is one of the things you will probably start to notice, is that if there is an author, you start with the author's last name, then a comma, first name, period. Then you give the title of the book, and because a print book is a major work, the title will be italicized, and then there'll be a period. Then you'll give the publication city, and then you'll use a colon. Okay, the double two dots, not the semicolon, which is a period and a comma, but the 2-dot colon. And then the publisher's name, a comma, the year of publication, period, and then the medium, period. Medium is the type of source it was, whether it was print or web or PDF or MP3 or MP4, etc. So in this example here, where do you think the author's name is? Take a moment to see if you can identify that. So Anderson, comma, Curtis, period. That's the author's full name. Then you'd be looking for the title. In this example, can you identify what area you would highlight as yellow as the title? Yes, the long tail, colon, why the future of business is selling less of more, period. That's the title. And then we have the publication information, beginning with the publication city, New York, colon, Hyperion is the name of the publisher, comma, year of publication, 2006, period, and then print because it was a print book. Now let's look at these examples of magazines. Okay, one is a print magazine and the other is an online magazine. So in a print magazine, just like in a book, you have the author's last name, comma, then the author's first name, and a period. Then you'll give, in quotation marks, you'll give the title of the article with a period before the quotation mark. And then you'll give the title of the magazine. And that is the same for both the article in the online magazine versus print. It's the publishing information that gets a little bit different between the print magazine and the online version of a magazine. So in the print version, after we have the title, then we give the day, month, year of publication. If it's only a monthly publication, you would just give the month and the year, and then the colon, and then you give the pages that you looked at of that magazine with a period, and then you give the medium and a period. So in this example, the author's name would be Walsh, comma, Brian, period. And then we would have the title of the article, not a watt to be wasted, period, and that would be in quotation marks. And then the title of the magazine would be, that's right, Time. So there's the title highlighted in yellow. Then we would have the day, month, year of publication, the 17th of March, 2008, and then the colon and the pages that article was found in, which was pages 46 through 48. And then the medium given is print because we looked at it actually physical magazine. Now with the article in the online magazine, like I mentioned before, some of it is exactly the same. The author's name, then the first name, then the title of the article in quotation marks, then the title of the magazine is italicized. But then we're looking for a publisher, because online magazines usually have a publisher. And that information is often shared with you at the very end of the web page, or if you saved it as a PDF, it's often at the very end of the PDF information. Sometimes you might also find it at the beginning of the information with the author's name. So you kind of have to look around for it. So after the title of the magazine, you would have the title of the publisher's name with a comma, then the date of publication and a period. Then you would have the medium. In this case, because it's online, it would be web, and then a period, and then the day, month, year of that you accessed the article. And that's really important, because with online content, sometimes the publishers or the content holders will go back and edit that. So if somebody is trying to research an article and they go find the same article as you and the information in the article is different, they can do a historical search of the web for the day that you accessed it and then find the version that you had. So in that way, again, as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, it's really important that you are very sincere in your representation of the sources that you give, and that day, month, and year of access is there for the reader, so the reader can go back and look at your scholarship. It's not really there for you, it's for the reader. So if they want to find that particular version of the article, they can. So let's look here at the example. The author here would be Lithwick, comma, Dahlia, period. And then the title of the article is Privacy Rights, Inc., and that's in quotation marks because it's the title of just the article itself. Then Slate is the title of the magazine in which it was published. Then Washington Post, Newsweek Interactive, that's the title of the publisher. And after that there's the comma, and then 14 October 2010. That is when it was actually published. That was when it first became live on the internet. And then we know that this is a web source because we have the words web there. And then we have the date of access, which was the 25th of October 2013. So you see that because that date was 3 years after it was originally published, who knows, this article at that point might be a little bit different than if somebody had accessed it on October 25th, 2011. So that's why it's really important to be sure that you're accurate when you're doing this. Now sometimes there are special source types because there's a myriad of different kinds of sources out there in this world. This one handbook might not have exactly the right kind of source that you're looking for, and so what you have to do then is sort of look at similar source types, and sometimes you might have to sort of gel the source types together. So you want to find something that's similar and then adjust accordingly. So for example, if you had a corporate author but it was on the web rather than print, you'd put the the print, you would put the date of access at the end, and you would say that the citation type is web rather than print, if that makes sense. And if you have questions, of course, ask me. That's what I'm here for, is to help you muddle through it, because even I don't have all of this memorized. Even I sometimes have to go up and look it up because there is so much of this, you know. I don't have everything memorized because I don't have to, because I like to use my handbook. That way I don't have to remember every single little piece of information. Okay, so let's recap where we've been. First, we determined why you need a Works Cited page. Then we figured out where your Works Cited page will go at the end of your essay. And then we saw how you would format your Works Cited page in Microsoft Word. We reviewed some of the basic things that you need to know to create your Works Cited page. We found the Works Cited samples in the Little Seagull Handbook. And then we used the examples in the Little Seagull Handbook for particular sources. Okay, well, again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me, and I look forward to hearing from